Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to Peter's Stories Lesson, the place where we gather not just for stories, but for truth, for the kind of truth that reaches past your eyes and your ears and settles somewhere deep inside your chest, where it stays long after the video ends. If you are here for the first time, I want you to know you did not arrive by accident. Something brought you here today. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a restless feeling you cannot name. Maybe somewhere inside you, there is a question you have been afraid to ask out loud. Whatever it is, I am glad you are here. Before we begin, if this is your first visit to this channel, I would like to ask you, from the bottom of my heart, please subscribe. Not just so the numbers grow, but because the stories we tell here are meant to be carried, to be shared, to be passed like a lantern from one hand to another in the dark. Subscribe so you never miss a story that might change your life. Hit the bell so the next one finds you when you need it most. Now, my friends, settle in. Put down whatever is rushing you. Take one slow breath, because today I want to tell you a story about a man named Edwin. Edwin was 81 years old the winter he finally sat still long enough to look at his life. Not the life he had built, not the routines, the pension, the small apartment with the cracked window he had been meaning to fix for 3 years. Not the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, or the television he kept on for company even when he wasn't watching. No, Edwin sat still and looked at the life he had not lived, the life that had waited patiently at his door for decades, knocking gently at first, then urgently, then, eventually, not at all. He was sitting in a wooden chair by that cracked window when the full weight of it came down on him. Outside, the first snow of December was falling. Soft, quiet, indifferent. The kind of snow that doesn't care what it covers. The kind of snow that buries everything equally. The beautiful and the broken, the cherished and the forgotten. Edwin watched it fall, and for reasons he could not immediately explain, he began to cry. Not the way old men cry in movies, with dignity, with one silver tear rolling down a lined cheek. He cried the way a person cries when they are completely alone and no one is coming and the pain is too large to keep inside any longer. He cried from somewhere beneath his ribs, in a place he hadn't visited in many, many years. He cried because he finally understood something. He had spent his entire life waiting for the right moment, waiting until he was ready. Waiting until circumstances were better, safer, more certain. Waiting until the fear went away. Waiting until tomorrow, next week, next year. Waiting and waiting and waiting, while the clock on the wall kept moving with absolute, merciless precision, pausing for nothing and no one, least of all for Edwin. And now he was 81 years old, sitting alone by a cracked window, watching snow fall on a life he had meant to live but never quite got around to starting. Edwin had not always been old, of course. There was a time, and he remembered it now with a sharpness that surprised him, like pressing a bruise you forgot was there, when he was young and full of something that could only be called possibility. He was 23 when he first saw Margaret. She was standing in the reference section of the university library, balancing 3 enormous books in her arms and squinting at the spine of a 4th as if it had personally offended her. She had dark hair pinned up carelessly, 2 strands escaping to fall across her cheek. She was wearing a green coat, the color of pine needles, and there was a smudge of blue ink on her left hand. Edwin had walked into that library to return a book he had borrowed 2 weeks late. He walked out 45 minutes later, having returned nothing and checked out nothing. having simply stood in the philosophy section pretending to read while he watched Margaret take notes in a yellow notebook with such focused intensity that the rest of the world seemed to blur around her. He thought about her for 3 days. On the 4th day, he saw her again, this time in the campus cafeteria. She was eating alone, reading, her green coat draped over the back of the chair. Edwin stood in the food line with his tray, his heart doing something embarrassing and involuntary inside his chest. He could have sat down beside her. He almost did. He had rehearsed in the shower that morning a perfectly reasonable opener about the book she was reading. He had even dressed slightly better than usual, which meant he had buttoned the top button of his shirt and actually ironed his trousers. But then the voice came, the voice that would become, over the decades, the most destructive presence in Edwin's life, more damaging than any enemy, more limiting than any obstacle. "Not yet," the voice said. "You're not ready. What if she doesn't like you? What if you stumble over your words? Wait until you know her better. Wait until the moment is right." Edwin sat down at a different table. He told himself it was fine. He told himself there would be another chance. And there was another chance. There were dozens of other chances spread across 2 years of shared library hours and overlapping lecture halls and mutual friends who threw parties where Edwin stood near the fireplace watching Margaret laugh and thinking, soon, 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 soon never came. Margaret graduated in June and moved to another city for a job she was brilliant enough to deserve. On her last evening on campus, there was a small farewell gathering at a friend's apartment. Edwin stood on the small balcony, looking at the city lights, when Margaret came outside and stood beside him. They talked for a long time about their plans, their fears, their futures. At one point, she leaned her elbows on the railing and said, very quietly, "Edwin, do you ever feel like you're standing at the edge of something enormous and you just can't make yourself jump?" He looked at her. The city lights were in her eyes. Her green coat was open at the collar. She was waiting, and he would understand this only 30 years later, replaying the memory in the grainy projector of his old age. She was waiting for him to say something true, he said. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes." She nodded, and after a moment she went back inside. He stood on that balcony alone until the party ended. He never told her, not once in 2 years, not even on the last night when she stood beside him in the dark and handed him the opening she had been hoping he would take. He told himself, "She's leaving anyway. What's the point?" He told himself. Maybe she didn't mean anything by it. Hansel, he told himself. There will be someone else. There were other women over the years. He dated several. One, a kind woman named Patricia who laughed easily and cooked extraordinarily well, stayed for almost 4 years. She told Edwin once, sitting across from him at the kitchen table over cups of tea that had gone cold, "I feel like you're always partly somewhere else, like you're always holding something back." Edwin did not know what to say. He thought about it for weeks afterward. He decided she was probably right, but that he wasn't sure what to do about it. And so he did nothing. And so Patricia, patient, warm, laughing Patricia, eventually grew tired of waiting for a man who was waiting for something even he couldn't name. She left on a Tuesday in April. Edwin told himself he would call her. Told himself he needed time. Told himself he would figure out what she needed from him, and he would change, and he would call. He waited 6 months. By then, Patricia had met someone else, a man who apparently did not have the habit of keeping himself at a careful, safe distance from everything that mattered. Edwin told himself it wasn't meant to be. He was 41 years old. His father called him that same autumn. Edwin's father was a quiet man, a man who expressed love through practical actions, mowed the lawn without being asked, fixed the leaking pipe before anyone noticed, slipped money into birthday cards without making a ceremony of it. He was not a man who called simply to talk. So when Edwin saw the number on his phone at 9:30 on a Thursday evening, he felt the slight weight of it, the unusual weight of an unusual call. He did not answer. He was in the middle of something. A work report, he thought, or perhaps just the television. He could not remember now. Whatever it was, it had seemed important enough in the moment to let the phone ring through to voicemail. He told himself he would call back tomorrow. His father's message was short, as all his father's messages were. Edwin, it's your father. Nothing urgent. Just calling to hear your voice. Call when you can. Oh, Edwin listened to it twice and felt a small, dull ache of something that might have been guilt. His father was 72 and had not been well. They spoke perhaps once a month, which had always seemed adequate to Edwin, though he occasionally sensed it was not adequate to his father. He thought, I'll call this weekend. We'll have a longer conversation. I'll visit soon. Mo. He did not call that weekend. He visited 6 weeks later because there was a family birthday. His father opened the door and looked at Edwin with eyes that held something complicated, love and relief and a carefully managed hurt, and said simply, "Good to see you, son." They talked over dinner about ordinary things. Edwin left at 8 o'clock because he had a long drive. His father died 11 weeks later, quietly as he had lived. A heart that had been struggling and had finally stopped struggling. At the funeral, Edwin found his father's phone among the items passed to family members. He scrolled through it without knowing why. He found the outgoing call record from that Thursday evening in autumn. He found a message. Nothing urgent, just calling to hear your voice. And understood, with a grief that was different from the clean grief of loss, that his father had not called for no reason. His father had called because he was lonely, because he was old and not well and needed to hear his son's voice, because the time was running out, and even a quiet man who expressed love through practical actions occasionally needed to say out loud, "I love you and I am glad you exist." Edwin had not called back. He had thought there was more time. Standing at that grave in November, Edwin was 42 years old, and he made himself a promise. He promised himself he would stop waiting. He would stop calculating and hesitating and holding himself back. He would call, he would show up, he would say the things that mattered before the window closed. He kept that promise for almost 4 months. The dream had been there since he was 19 years old. Edwin had wanted to build things, not in the abstract, philosophical way of a man who wants to leave a legacy, but literally, physically, with his hands. He had grown up watching his grandfather work wood in a small shed behind the family house, and there was something about the smell of sawdust and the clean language of grain and joint that had lived in Edwin's blood ever since. At 19, he had sketched designs in a notebook. Simple furniture at first. A chair, a table, a bookshelf with clean, honest lines. But over time, the notebook filled with more ambitious things. Small structures, a garden shelter, a reading room, a tiny house, perfectly proportioned, every joint deliberate. He had studied accounting because his mother had worried about stability, and he had not pushed back because pushing back required the kind of conviction he kept meaning to develop. He told himself, after I'm established, after I have some savings, after I've paid off the flat. At 29, he bought a house with a garage that could be converted into a workshop. He told himself, next spring, I'll set it up. Buy the tools, clear the space, start. Next spring, he was too busy. At 36, he took a course in woodworking, a Saturday class, 8 sessions. He was the oldest student. He was also the most naturally capable, and the instructor told him so more than once. You have a feel for this, the instructor said on the last day. You should keep going. Edwin intended to. He bought several pieces of quality timber and stacked them neatly in the garage. He made a list of tools he would need. He even visited a workshop supply shop and held a beautifully balanced hand plane and thought, yes, this is it. This is the thing. He did not buy it. He told himself he would come back when he had more time to choose properly. The timber sat in the garage for 2 years, slowly warping in the uncontrolled humidity until Edwin threw it away during a weekend of guilt-driven cleaning. He was 53. He told himself it wasn't too late. At 60, he retired from accounting and told himself, now finally is the time. He set up the garage properly. He spent 2 weekends clearing and organizing. He made a list of projects, starting small and building up. He stood in the doorway of that clean, waiting space and felt something close to joy, the joy of almost. His back began to give him trouble that winter. Nothing catastrophic, manageable with care, but it meant he could not stand for long periods. And it meant bending and lifting were difficult. And it meant the physicality of what he had imagined became, slowly, a negotiation rather than a freedom. He adapted his plans. He could still do some things, smaller things, but the image he had carried in his blood since 19, the smell of sawdust, the language of grain, the clean physical prayer of making something from nothing, had narrowed, had contracted, had become something that fit now inside much tighter walls than the ones he had imagined building inside, and finished it imperfectly. He put it in the corner of his living room and looked at it sometimes and felt things he could not name. It was his granddaughter who broke him open completely. He had a son, David, from a brief relationship in his mid-40s. It had not lasted, the relationship, though Edwin still felt the particular shame of knowing he had let it end for the same reasons everything ended. The waiting, the holding back, the inability to step fully into love without keeping one foot outside the door. David had grown up largely with his mother. Edwin had been present in the way that a man who is ashamed of his absence tries to be present. Occasional weekends, birthday calls, Christmas gifts purchased with money because he did not always know how to offer time. David was a grown man now with a daughter of his own. Her name was Lily. She was 7 years old and had her grandfather's eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness and absolutely no patience for adults who were less than completely honest. Lily visited Edwin on a Sunday in October when she was 7 years old, and she walked around his apartment with the frank inspection of a child who has not yet learned to be polite about what she notices. She stopped in front of the small, imperfect side table and studied it. "Did you make this, Grandpa?" "I did," Edwin said. "It's a little wobbly," she said. "It is," Edwin agreed. She ran her hand along the top of it thoughtfully. "Why did you make it wobbly?" Edwin opened his mouth to say something about learning curves and imperfect materials, and then he stopped, because Lily was 7 years old and looking at him with those clear, patient, utterly honest eyes. And in her complete absence of guile, he heard the question the way she actually meant it. "Why didn't you make it right? Why didn't you practice more? Why did you wait so long?" he said very quietly. "I started too late." Lily nodded as if this was a reasonable explanation for something sad. "You should have started when you were little," she said. "Like how I draw. I draw every day so I get better." She moved on to inspect the cracked window with equal frankness. Edwin stood by the wobbly table and could not speak. The night Lily went home, Edwin could not sleep. He lay in the dark and did what he had been avoiding his entire adult life. He let himself look directly at the truth without flinching, without softening it, without telling himself it was fine or it wasn't too late or everything happened for a reason. He was 79 years old. He lived alone. He had a son who loved him cautiously, At a distance, the way you love someone who has taught you that love is not entirely reliable. He had a granddaughter who thought he was a little wobbly. He had a garage workshop he visited rarely now because of his back, and a side table in the corner that was the only physical evidence of the dream he had carried for 60 years. He had never told Margaret he loved her. He had never called his father back. He had never fully shown up for Patricia, never shown up for David the way David had needed, never shown up for himself, not really, not with the whole terrifying, ungoverned, vulnerable wholeness that life asks of you if you want to truly live it. He had waited. He had always waited. And what had the waiting gotten him? Safety. Certainly. The deep, suffocating safety of a life that could never be rejected because it had never fully been offered. The protection of never having committed fully to anything. Love, work, family, dream. Because if you never commit fully, you can never fully fail. But lying in that dark, Edwin understood something that cut through every defense he had ever constructed. The avoidance of failure is not the same as success. He had been so afraid of doing things wrong that he had done nothing fully. And now he was 79 years old and alone in the dark. And the things he had been afraid of losing, love, connection, joy, purpose, he had lost not through risk, but through the absence of it. He had protected himself right out of his own life. Edwin got out of bed at 2 a.m. and went to the small wooden desk by the window and found a piece of paper and a pen. He began to write, not a list, not a plan, a letter to no one specific, to everyone, to himself, perhaps most of all. He wrote slowly, because his hands were not steady and the pen required patience, and he wrote the things he had never said out loud. I was afraid my whole life. I was afraid of being wrong, of being rejected, of being too much or not enough. I was afraid that if I stepped fully into the life I wanted, I would somehow fail at it, and that the failure would confirm what I secretly feared, that I was not worthy of the things I wanted. So I waited. I told myself I was being careful, being wise, being patient, but I was not being patient. I was hiding. I was hiding inside, not yet, and someday, and when the time is right. And I used those words as a wall between myself and everything that terrified me with its beauty. I was afraid of Margaret because she was extraordinary and I was ordinary, and I thought love required a kind of worthiness I hadn't yet achieved. I was afraid of Patricia because she saw me clearly and being Time is the one thing in life you can never get back. Too many people spend their lives waiting for the right moment to chase their dreams, express their love, forgive someone, start over, or become who they truly want to be. But the truth is, life keeps moving whether we act or not. The old man's greatest pain was not failure, it was regret. He realized too late that fear, hesitation, and procrastination stole the years he could never recover. This story teaches us that courage is not about having no fear. It is about acting before time slips away. Love the people around you now. Chase your dreams now. Speak your truth now. Because someday, later may no longer exist. If this story touched your heart, let it be a wake-up call. Don't wait until life forces you to look back with regret. Start today. Take that first step. Make that call. Follow that dream. Tell the people you love how much they matter to you. Your future is being created by the choices you make right now. Remember, small actions today can change your entire life tomorrow. And if you believe this message can inspire someone else, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Peter's Stories lesson, and share this story with someone who needs this reminder today.